Cheide.
For this 3-minute rules, we will be looking at the close combat phase, and in particular the sub-phase Fight a Round of Close Combat. In addition, we will be looking at the rules for Roll to Wound. All of this can be found on page 51 of the large 8th edition rulebook. Once we have rolled all of our rolls to hit, we now take successful hits and re-roll those dice for rolls to wound. So from our previous example, let's say that the Empire archers had begun here and they had 10 attacks against the dwarf warriors and they successfully hit on 4 attacks. What we will want to do now is to roll all 4 of these again to see if they wound. The reason for this additional step is because not every hit actually leads to a wound. Some hits may in fact bounce off without causing any damage. Therefore, we need to roll in order to see if they do in fact cause a wound. Before we go ahead and roll our hit dice to see if they wound, we will need to figure out what we need to roll in order to be successful. In order to do this, we will need to compare the strength of the attacker versus the toughness of the defender or the target. And this makes sense because we are comparing how strong the attack is versus how tough the defender is. In this particular case now, we have a strength of 3 from the archers and we have a toughness of 4 from the dwarves. With these strength and toughness values, we may now move to the to wound chart. Let's begin by locating the attacker's strength on the left, and we find the 3, and we move across until we come into contact with the target's toughness of 4. And what we see here is that when the archers are attacking the dwarves, they will need to roll 5 pluses in order to wound. So rolling our 4 hits now, 5 pluses, and we do not wound on any of those. Now let's jump ahead and go over to the dwarves and say the dwarves are attacking back. When we look at the dwarves' strength, we see they have a strength of 3 and the archers have a toughness of 3. With these numbers then we may go back to the chart and find the 3 on the attacker's strength and move over until where it meets the 3 on the target's toughness, and what we see here is that we need 4 pluses to wound. So if we go back to our previous example where the dwarves had 5 hits, we can now roll off to see if they wound. They will be wounding on 4 pluses. So what we see here is that they have 1 successful wound. Of course, this is quite an easy example because in this unit, each one of these models has the exact same strength and toughness, and in this unit, each of the models has the exact same strength and toughness. Now, were we to have one model in one of these units, say this archer who had a different strength and toughness value, we'd have to roll separately those dice in order to take into account that difference. It is also important to point out here that in this example we have been just comparing the base strength and toughness of the models. There are certain situations, however, where these may be slightly different. For example, dwarves very often use what are called great weapons, and great weapons give them an additional +2 strength. So when they're using great weapons, it's obvious that they are able to wound much easier. We will talk about these additional rules in later episodes. Important now to remember, however, is just to be able to compare base strength and toughness with one another when you are rolling to wound. And just as with the to hit chart, the to wound chart also has some rules of thumb that will help us to quickly figure out the to wound numbers we need to roll. So if we look back to the chart, the first thing we notice is that equal strength and equal toughness between the attacker and the target mean that you will always be hitting on a 4+. So if we are comparing 3 to 3, we see we need a 4+, 4 to 4, 4+, 5 to 5, 4+, and so forth. In addition, if the strength of the attacker exceeds the toughness of the target by 1 point, the attacker will need 3 pluses. If it exceeds by 2 points, 2 pluses. In contrast, if the toughness of the target exceeds that of the attacker by 1 point, the attacker will need 5 pluses. And if by 2 points, the attacker will need 6 pluses. In summary then, when we are rolling to wound, the important numbers to keep in mind are 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. As such, a 1 will always be a failure to wound. With that, we have come to the conclusion of this 3-minute rules on the close combat phase, and the rules concerning roll to wound. Thank you for joining us here today at Grey Army Gaming, where Grey can always play.